I wanted to reply to this comment here talking about William clearly trusting Jamie at the end of season 7. Now this will have spoilers for the books and the show, so if you are looking to avoid those, please do keep on scrolling. So in Go and Tell the Bees That I Am Gone, there's actually a very interesting passage that leans into this idea that William trusts Jamie despite the sentence that the show added at the end of season 7 where he says, "I will never call you father," which does not take place in the books. But to explain this fully, I want to first remind everyone of the book differences between Jane's death in the books versus the show. In chapter 134 of Written in My Own Heart's Blood, this scene takes place in Savannah, Georgia, not in Philadelphia like the show has it take place. And Jane is actually buried with the help of Lord John Grey, and he works with Campbell to retrieve the body for Fanny, and Claire and Fanny actually meet him outside of Campbell's home and office. Claire and Fanny go to Campbell's office and meet John there by accident, and when Claire explains the situation to John, he tells them to wait for him outside, and he is the one who handles the release of Jane's body to Fanny, and him and Claire actually have a very interesting conversation afterwards. In that conversation, John tells Claire that he had suspected that William might go to Jamie for help, but hoped for both their sakes that he did not, and also tells Claire that William told him he had an errand to deal with outside of the city and that he would be returning that night. Claire also tells him that they need to bury her, and John knows of a family that has a private cemetery where she can be laid to rest. This is because she cannot be laid to rest in a churchyard, because in their religion, taking your own life is a sin. And that's something that Jamie also grapples with in Go and Tell the Bees That I'm Gone, because he finds himself praying for Jane quite often, even though his religion says, and his faith says, that that's something he shouldn't necessarily do. John tells Claire that they will be able to bury Jane the following morning and to plan on arriving the next day. Now at that point, Claire tells Lord John about an encounter she had with Ezekiel Richardson in her surgery a few days prior, and this is where the show rearranges this scene. The scene in Claire's surgery is when Captain Richardson asks Claire to spy on the Grey family, and at this point he is already a member of the Continental Army, and Claire tells Lord John about that conversation in this encounter, dealing with everything going on with Jane. So obviously in the show she has this conversation with Richardson while married to John. They changed that. Claire also warns John that Richardson knows about you, what you are, I mean, is what she says. And John asks if Claire has any idea how he came to know that knowledge, and Claire says she does not. Now the next day at the burial, William does show up, but he stands at the entrance to the cemetery, and the rest of the group take part in the services. Now John is there, Jenny Murray is there, Fergus and Marsley and their children are there, Ian, Rachel, and Fanny. And again, this takes place after Fergus and Marsley lose their son Henri Christian, so it's definitely a very sad moment in the books. In this chapter, it's in Claire's point of view, and she turns around after the services are wrapping up and spots William standing outside of the cemetery with a horse that he gifts to Fanny. In the show, I think this horse that we see them walking away from is meant to represent that horse. And in the books, he presents the horse named Miranda to Fanny and says, "This is your horse now, you're going to need it," and asks Claire, "Will you take care of her, Mother Claire?" And Claire says, "Of course we will." A few days later, before William plans to leave Savannah, he approaches Jamie, and so this again is a slight deviation from the books, where this conversation takes place a few days later on the docks where Jamie is working in Savannah. And again, William does not say, "I will never call you father" in that scene. That's definitely something the show has added, probably for a payoff in season 8, where we will get William saying father to Jamie. But in chapter 12 of Go and Tell the Bees That I Am Gone, William is at Mount Josiah Plantation in Virginia and is paid a visit by a man named John Cinnamon, and also runs into a man named Minogue that John Grey tells Claire about in their morning after scene in season 7. He doesn't know if he's going to stay at Mount Josiah Plantation or what the next steps in his life are going to be. And again, it's a continuation of that crisis of identity that he's been having throughout season 7 and since finding out that Jamie is his father. In the books, there's a much heavier influence on a subplot that the show seems to have written out, which is that Hal's son Benjamin has gone missing and is reportedly dead. And William has figured out that he is not. He finds his grave, and the man in the grave is not Ben. So his primary focus right now is to go on a mission to locate his cousin. But before he can do that, he thinks that he has a few things that he has to make right in his head to clear his headspace. One of which is thinking about Rachel, but he realizes that she's now married to Ian, and so there's no fixing that scenario with Rachel. Then he thinks about Jane and how that can't be fixed, and it can't be erased from his memory either. And the thoughts of Jane then segue into thoughts of Jamie. He can't fix the situation about his true paternity, but it makes him think about the night where him and Jamie teamed up to go and try and save Jane, and he realizes after that mission that there's no way that he can deny the truth that Jamie is his father. And as he's thinking about that time that he spent with Jamie, he has a recollection of Jamie saying, "You have a claim to my help for any venture you deem worthy," which is something I wish the shows had included in the scene, because I think that's a very important line for William as he's navigating these next steps, and especially in Go and Tell the Bees That I'm Gone. And he remembers that Fraser did help at once and without question, and not only for Jane, but for her little sister, Frances, which is when we get this really beautiful passage of him remembering the funeral and how he was so full of grief that he had basically thrust Fanny into Fraser's arms and left without a word. And he realizes that he very easily could have entrusted her to his father, Lord John, but he didn't. He didn't even think twice about giving her to Jamie, which is funny because in the book, Claire is the one that he technically gives her to, but we hear him thinking about it here, knowing that it really was meant to be something that he trusted Jamie with. He also has an echo of the no, I am not sorry in his head while he's remembering this moment, along with the feeling of Jamie's hand on his cheek. And as he continues to have a lot of anxiety over who he is and what his obligations are, this moment where he thinks of Jamie and that kind of breakthrough moment for him in their relationship is a really nice passage in the aftermath of what happens between them in the finale. So in the books, William definitely has a little bit of a soft spot for Jamie. He ends up choking on his food as he's thinking about it. I think it's a lot for him to grapple with, but a really beautiful scene that I wanted show watchers to know happens in the books.